the moms in the world, let's chat it up. We're talking competitions, uniforms, and all of the above. It's the Cheer Mom, yes, the Cheer Mom podcast. Cheer Mom, yes, the Cheer Mom podcast. Cheer Moms, your podcast is on.
It's been a while since I spoke about Delilah. If you don't remember, or if you're new around here, I have a sparkly cheer bag that was gifted to me by my friends at Rebel. And this is not an ad. And it is, you see the sparkly cheer bags walking around at competitions, and they were so kind to give me a Rebel Dream bag. And it's pink and it's sparkly, and I feel like I'm in the in crowd. I feel so cool. And I was so thrilled that I named her, and her name is Delilah. I'm actually going to have her name, and you know what's it called? Embroidered on there. As it turns out, these Rebel Dream bags are not just good for cheerleaders' junk. Let's just call a spade a spade. There's a lot of junk in there. This is not an ad. There are so many pockets and compartments and places to organize and put things and I happened to get it at the perfect time. I was doing like 1 million photo shoots in Orlando that week, and it holds my water bottle, all of my lenses, my camera body. There's a little pouch for me to put my memory cards in, and it's the perfect camera bag. It gets super heavy because when I travel, you add my laptop and my iPad and my tablet, like it fits it all. And then it weighs like 100 pounds. And I'm only 5 feet tall. And so when I put it on, people are like, whoa, that's as big as you are. And I'm like, you should see the 6-year-olds that walk around with this. With the same bag. So I love it. It's pink and sparkly. And I put my kitty cat bows that they gave me on there just like a real cheerleader. So I have a pink and sparkly backpack with pink and sparkly bows on it. And I wonder why people don't take me seriously. It's completely out of context when you're not in cheer, but it's so useful that I can't not use it. I can't stop using it. And so I'm walking around with my pink backpack all of the time. And I've become kind of known for it. I'm like, yeah, it's like a cheer thing. You wouldn't understand. So a few days ago, I got into a sort of like heated conversation with someone. And we were going back and forth. And there was this sort of, we'll call it a mic drop moment. The other person was like, I think we need to part ways right now. And I was like, I think you're right. And I swing around and I walk away it wasn't my husband, with my pink sparkly backpack with the bows on it. That's all I could think of was like, man, that would have been great if I wasn't wearing like a pink backpack. It's fine. I love her. I love her so much. If you remember, I had Coach Lain on the podcast not that long ago. If you have not heard that episode, it is awesome. I absolutely love him. And we didn't even get halfway through our conversation the first time. And it was so good. I was like, we have to have you back. I have to have you back to finish this conversation. And so we do. And he talks about, is it possible to have balance in cheerleading, in this sport that is so all-consuming and all-encompassing that a lot of athletes, most athletes, feel like they don't have time for anything else. And he talks about why that might not be serving you athletes well, and if and how it's possible to have other things in your life that fill you besides cheer. And I hit him with some tough questions like, how do you even do that? And what about the people that are committed and have to suffer because somebody missed a practice? And we talk about practice, and we talk about that culture and that atmosphere and those attitudes in cheerleading from an athlete perspective, from a coach and owner perspective, and from a parent perspective. He gives us some stuff to chew on. It's not a practical, like, A plus B equals C, it's like, okay, let's think about what the real question is here. I so appreciate that level of meaning and depth in any conversation. So enjoy Coach Lain again. I would not be surprised if he was a regular guest on the podcast, but let me know what you think. Leave your reviews, leave your comments on the YouTube channel at the Cheer Mom blog. And don't forget to nominate a Cheer Mom of the Week. I would love to call out and recognize cheer moms all around the country and around the world who are doing great things, who are doing small things to make people's day. You can nominate a Cheer Mom of the Week by emailing hello@wonderfuldaymedia.com. That's hello@wonderfuldaymedia.com. Just send a short little paragraph about why you're nominating this cheer mom, what her name is, what program she's part of. And I can't wait to hear about them and hear from you guys. So without further ado, here's Coach Lain Lee. I absolutely love callbacks, or what they call Easter eggs. You know, those little, if you know moments in movies and remakes and songs. And the cheer world has so many little things like that that are important to us, that are just specific to us. Things like hit 0 and 2 minutes and 30 seconds, not to mention the letters that are so important to teams and programs. I don't know a program that doesn't have some version of this. You know what I mean? Like G3FCA2A, OAFAAF, SE4L. You get it, right? That's why I started TCC Jewelry. At tccjewelry.com, we don't just sell jewelry, we create conversation starters, from bracelets to rings and necklaces for all ages and sizes, and even custom designs for teams and programs. TCC has you covered. There's even opportunity for fundraising and kickbacks for gyms. So basically, we want to make you look good and help you get to your nationals events. Whether you're a cheer parent, an athlete, or just a fan of looking amazing, TCC Jewelry is your go-to. Check it out at tccjewelry.com and enter code CheerMomPod for 15% off of your order. Check out tccjewelry.com and enter code CheerMomPod for 15% off your order. That's tccjewelry.com. Enter code CheerMomPod for 15% off your order. We've been vibing ever since our conversation.
Yeah, and it would be nice if we could vibe in between these, but it's still nice to be able to vibe when we're on mic and on camera, you know?
I'm picking up what you're dropping down. We vibe on Instagram, you know.
Truth.
In the comments.
We do. That's true. We do. And it's always a good time, because I like connecting with folks who are not afraid of the discomfort of exploring new possibilities or different ways of thinking about stuff. So it's always a nice time.
I love it. Okay, so welcome back, first of all.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
And we just barely scratched the surface on living a balanced life, handling fear, mental blocks. And so I wanted to make sure to have you back, because the part of your Coach Lain method that I picked up on the most when we first started talking, I mean, so much has happened since then, but when we first met, I was like, I want you to talk about that. And we talk about fear and we talk about all those things, but cheer is so all encompassing, especially all-star cheer. And those of us who are loyal and committed and know the deal know that, especially in the springtime, nothing really exists outside of cheerleading. And you said something that intrigued me, that's not necessarily the way that it should go.
Right. That's
Why
my
is that?
takeaway, at least. Well, because at this point, I've done hundreds of mental performance training sessions with athletes and their parents. And the one thing for the athletes who are really struggling with anxiety, the question I always ask is, do you have any hobbies? Do you have anything? And I always put it this way. I frame it like this. Do you have anything that you can get lost in for an entire Sunday? Right? You lose an entire day to doing it. And it's a resounding no. You know, like, what do you do for fun? Oh, hang out with friends. At cheer? Yeah. Oh, what do you do for fun? You usually go to tumbling. You know, it's like, it's always about cheer. So there is, as you said, like this dramatic and very chronic lack of balance where it's not just enough to be committed to a high performing sport and to be a high performing level athlete. You have to be all in. And it's funny because, like, I know coaches and those who are invested, you know, involved and invested in cheer, we make this joke, or at least I make the joke, that it's like the mafia. Like, once you're in, and it's so funny because, like, so many coaches are like, yeah, this is going to be my last year and blah, blah, blah. And then you see them 5 years later, you're like, what happened? Well, my daughter wanted me to keep coaching, or, you know, I just couldn't leave the girl. It's really hard. It's really hard to get out. So I think that it's part of the culture is that if you're either all in, or you're not. And, and it pains me because I've seen posts from creators, like very respected people or people who are highly regarded in the industry, mocking families who choose to take breaks and who choose to step away, who choose to, like, give their children a chance to break this cycle of crippling anxiety. And I've seen other people that I know and respect in the industry laugh right along at those posts. And it's disappointing, but it goes to show how the culture is. And so something has to be done. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this today, because it needs to be at least on the minds of parents and coaches. And I really want to impact coaches and speak to coaches today and say, hey, maybe cheer isn't for everyone. You know, maybe cheer isn't life for everyone, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm sitting here agreeing with you, but thinking, well, we all only have the same 24 hours in a day. Like, how? Sure. How is it possible to live a balanced life when you're even a cheer mom? Because it takes over.
That's a whole other
our
episode,
life
girl.
Too. Yeah, I know. But for athletes, you know, I know one athlete that did something what I consider totally opposite of cheerleading, like performing arts, and was very involved in performing arts and theater and things like that. And I'm thinking, how do you have time to do that? Because I was in performing arts, and that took up every day, 5 days a week at school. So it seems like everything these days, it requires us to be all in.
Yeah.
So, like, how am I supposed to find something that helps me detach from cheer? Because everything takes time.
I think the importance is in understanding when you can take a beat. You know, like everyone that's involved in cheer, and parents who have multiple kids involved in multiple different things, or maybe even all of their kids are involved in cheer. I know that scheduling and planning is a big part of their daily routine. And it's almost like if you can't find the time, you have to make the time. So start scheduling. Start by scheduling in non-cheer involved activities for your kids, and making sure that they can, you know, I was listening or re-listening to a podcast I did with my buddy Kevin Bracey during the pandemic. And his podcast was called 21 and Under. So it was directly aimed at the youth. And we were talking about finding your passion. And I said, well, you know, to find your passion, you have to try a little bit of everything. And it's really tough in this context, what we're talking about, to find the time to try a little bit of everything. And so you really have to plan accordingly to make the time to try things. There are a lot of families that I know who have kids involved in this industry, and this is probably going to be, I can already see this is going to be a contested comment, or I can already see the comment section on this, but there are a lot of families who will schedule vacations and breaks whenever they can. And I know from a cheer coach standpoint or owner standpoint, that is like your worst nightmare, because you're like, well, these people are never here when we need them. But they're an example of families who are making time for themselves and for them to be families, even in the situation where they have a lot of responsibility and a lot of demands for their, time and schedule. It has to be done right. And I can't speak on how that is actually, like, what the right way to do it is, the right way to handle it. I can tell you effective communication should definitely be a part of that equation. But that's a good example of, like, making time for yourself, for your family, for your kids to try other things or just be kids,
Okay, so first, what are some examples of things that our kids can try to find out if they're passionate about it?
Art, just something simple. Have them try an arts and crafts project, right? That's something I know. There's this young lady I coached at a high school during our tumbling classes, and I remember when the pandemic hit, she started posting art, and she didn't have time to do that when cheer season was, like, in full swing. And she was not an artist. This was something that she decided to try during the pandemic. She started painting. And, like, I think it started with, like, paint by numbers. And then she was like, oh, I think I kind of like this. And she kept it going. It didn't last forever, but it was enough time for her to, like, take a mental break and an emotional break from something that previously was causing her a lot of anxiety, because she was one of those athletes who really struggled with the physicality of tumbling. And so she was, as many tumbling athletes do, unfairly comparing herself to other athletes within that realm or that environment, because that's what we do. We normalize this behavior, just like kicking and punching in a dojo scenario, right? You go into a dojo, kicking and punching, super normal. Throwing people over your shoulder and grappling, that's normal. But then you go outside, it's illegal. With tumbling, it's like you don't go outside and see people, tumbling down the grocery store aisle or to the post office. It's normalized in the four walls of our gyms and our practice areas, and we unfairly compare ourselves to the other athletes there. And that's what she was doing. She was comparing herself to her teammates who had been tumbling longer, or maybe were a little bit more physically predisposed to greater mobility and flexibility. So this forced break that we all had to take gave her an opportunity to try something different. Have them try art. Have them take, we live in a time, the greatest time in human history, where, like, anything you want to try is literally at your fingertips, So whether it's racing, remote control cars outside, maybe picking up track and field, art, it can be anything that just removes you from the mindset and the culture of cheer. That's it.
I know several athletes who have translated very well out of cheer into track and field. And
right. My sister was one of those. Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Baking comes to mind, or cooking and
baking. That's a great one.
Yeah. My daughter picked up crocheting and has loved that.
There you go. There was a young lady on the at the Swedish team, or the gym in Stockholm that I've worked with. She was on the Swedish version of American Idol, and her thing was singing. Her thing was singing. It's funny because it took her a couple of years to transition, and, like, I think there was a grieving period of letting go of the idea of not being a competitive cheer athlete anymore, right? And so I remember her and her mom were one of the families that would drive my wife and I around in between practices. And she expressed to us that she had a love for singing. Because I asked her, I was like, as I often do, like, hey, do you have anything that you do outside of cheer? She's like, I sing. And up until then, it was just like this little thing that she did on the side. And then it turned into a hobby, and then that hobby turned into a new career for her. So I think that's another thing to think about for parents, is like, and coaches, what comes after this, right? For your high level athlete, you might be thinking like, oh, it'll be simple for her to transition into something else, but it may not be. I just came across a post. Oh, I had posted something on social media on Instagram about professionalism in the cheer industry. And one comment said exactly this. She was like, this is still a sport that doesn't have too many options for their athletes afterward, right? For them to transition into or for them to progress into. Because we're still struggling with, scholarships and funding for athletes that want to do it in college. For it being recognized as a formalized sport by most, districts and counties and states and countries. There's even professionally, like you could say you were a cheer athlete. It's not the 1930s anymore, right? Where in the 30s, if you were a male cheerleader or crowd leader in college, you were getting a glowing recommendation because I read this one corporate executive back in the 30s said that being a male cheerleader was akin to being a college quarterback for the football team. That's how it was a position of prestige and honor, like it showed that you had real commitment and grit. It's not like that anymore. So we need to be thinking ahead to like, what are they going to do after? How are they going to transition out? And what is that transition going to look like for them? Is it going to be smooth? Is it going to be rough? Are they going to, because I've talked to the parents and the athletes who are just kind of like aimlessly wandering for a little bit because they're like, the structure that I got from competing every year for the last 11 years is suddenly gone. Like, what do I do now? So.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of young adults get, for lack of a better word, kind of stuck in cheerleading. Like they love it.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, I'm good at this. I haven't known anything else for basically 2/3 of my life. So I'm going to stay and coach, or I'm going to be on an open worlds team, or I'm going to try to be a gym owner, or this or that. And sometimes it works out really well for them, but I've seen enough athletes to cause for concern that they're like, well, I'm here because like it's the only thing that has kept me safe and structured for so long. There's nothing like this. And at some point, you're going to have to get launched out of cheerleading unless you're super, super lucky.
Right.
And then what? And I've seen adult cheerleaders retire and kind of feel down and lost.
Yeah.
Because they've lost that part of their life. And it's a really tough transition. It's a tough transition becoming an adult anyway. And then you add this thing that you've been all in on for so long. It's like, what do I do now? So that's a really good point. I want to transition to, you mentioned coaches. And I too have seen and heard the comments where coaches are like, well, somebody decided to take a spring break, and so now the team suffers.
Let's get into it, please.
Those passive aggressive things that they say or email to all the parents, but that they're saying to the athletes, and they turn, in some places, they're turning the athletes against each other. It's like, well, so-and-so isn't here, so I guess we can't do this. And, I'm not saying to praise athletes for missing practice, but how would you advise, first of all, coaches to handle that when the whole team being there is so important? And then I want to follow that up with, how do parents deal with that kind of pressure and that kind of criticism?
I just think it's important to practice emotional intelligence when handling these situations, and the passive aggressive comments and humor really shows and tells a lot about your personality. And despite what you might say behind in front of everybody, it's revealing a lot about how you actually think about the athletes that you say you care about. It's just an interesting thing to me, like when you really boil it down, because I got kind of really perturbed at a post recently about this. And so I wrote down my thoughts, and like, it really makes you wonder. It's like, okay, so the athlete isn't performing to your liking on the team, and then they decide to take a break at the end of the season and say that they're just going to work on their tumbling, or they're, going to do this, take a break to focus on this. And then they stop coming to tumbling. That should be pretty telling of a few things. Either one, maybe they want to try something else. Maybe this is something they've decided isn't quite for them. Maybe it's the passive aggressive behavior and the humor and the way that you're handling it that is making athletes turn away from your program or just the idea of cheer altogether. I cannot tell you, Kristen, how many comments, if you guys are listening, go to my TikTok, look at the comments on my posts. How many comments are, I wish I had a coach like you. I wouldn't have quit cheerleading if I had, or something like that. Or this is exactly why I quit cheerleading, right? It's so many people that are scarred from these sorts of interactions and these sorts of the ways that they're behaving and handling these situations. But you have an athlete who wasn't performing. And so a lot of coaches, you want something done about it. And now they're saying, okay, well, look, I'm recognizing I'm not performing the way that I'd like to. Maybe I have a little bit of anxiety. Maybe I have some sort of trauma that's associated with doing the skill. I'm going to take a step back this year. For a performance coach, that is a great decision because you are disrupting the pattern, right? And so you're now saying, hey, focus on yourself for a second. That's perfectly fine. Especially like the 8 to 12-year-old range, those athletes are so concerned about taking care of their teammates that they are willing to put themselves at a deficit, right? Mentally, emotionally, physically, just to make sure that everybody else is like, they're not letting their team down, and they need a break sometimes. But from the coach's perspective, the way they joke and talk about it, it's like, okay, well, you were pissed off when they weren't performing on the team. Now they're off the team. And now you're still going to give them crap about not coming to work, even though they clearly have communicated that they needed a break. Maybe the parents need a financial break. Like, you don't know these families' situations. And for me, and I can speak like this because I'm not a gym owner, because I'm not a head coach, because I'm not a choreographer. I get to be an objective third party, right? Where I get to have the experience of having been in all-star culture as a coach, as the son of a gym owner, as an athlete myself, and now some years later bring a different perspective to it where I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. It's almost been 20 years and that is still going on. Then yes, athletes need a break. They need to be able to do this. So going back to, wait, what was your original question? Because I got slightly distracted.
No, yeah. Before we get there, you mentioned being a team player and not wanting to let your team down.
Right.
So how can athletes tell the difference between a healthy way of being a team player, and there are sacrifices required of cheer athletes to make sure that the team is successful, and in this world and culture of extremes that we all live in, that it's got to be all or nothing, or it's got to be one extreme or another, how do they tell the difference between a healthy team player sacrifice and what you're talking about?
That's a great question. I think while you were asking, the first thing that came to mind is the way that I look at comparison, right? Like, comparison is a great tool, a great motivator or inspirer to help you to want to be better at whatever it is that you do or who it is that you are as a person. There is such a thing as healthy comparison. But then the moment that comparison starts to become self-deprecating, it changes into unhealthy comparison, right? That's how I look at sacrifice. If you can say, I'm going to stop doing this, or I'm going to give this up to better this person on my team or to better the team as a whole, and we all can grow from that sacrifice, that's good sacrifice. But if it gets to the point where you are constantly giving, I look at it like the love languages, right? If you are constantly giving and you are depleting your own emotional love tank, and no one is refilling it, or they're not refilling it in such a way, or the efforts are being done, like they're still doing things to reciprocate the sacrifice, but it's not the way you need it, and so your personal love tank isn't getting refilled, that's when it becomes unhealthy sacrifice. And so that's the way I would differentiate it, is if you can say, I'm going to sacrifice this, that, and the third for the better of the team, for the better of my gym, for the better of our program, I'm willing to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when that starts to become a pattern of behavior, and, you know, like you said, people get stuck in this industry for decades because it's not really something that evolves. Like, and if it does evolve, it evolves very slowly. But you can just, if you're just nose to the grindstone, going, because that's the one thing cheer culture always requires is more sacrifice, more dedication, more money, more effort, more power, more speed, right? More skills. Then you're going to get stuck, and you're going to look up 20 years later and you're going to say, wow, I was just doing this out of habit. I was just giving. What do I have to show for it? What came back my way that was meaningful? And I think that there's a lot of athletes and parents and coaches who can say, like, yeah, I've just been sacrificing because I thought it was for the greater good. And now that you're making me think about it, nothing came back in my direction. At least if it did, it wasn't what I needed to refill that love tank, or to refill my energy and get me back up to a place where I would be in a healthy position to sacrifice again.
Okay, so how do athletes and parents kind of deal with the inevitable criticism or passive aggression when they do decide to take care of themselves and put their family first, or put something else first? Maybe if it's a one-off or something, you know, something like that, and they have been committed and they're getting comments like that. How would you encourage an athlete and a parent to deal with that?
If you're currently dealing with it, my heart goes out to you, because unfortunately, there weren't precautions taken to prepare for a moment like this. I would say always be taking the stock, or evaluating the relationships that you're building in these communities. And I don't want to come off as pessimistic. I want to say, like, I think in every relationship or every environment, you have to always be mindful of how much agency you give to other people to influence your life. That's across the board, everywhere. So I would say, if you're in a position where maybe you're just entering this culture, or you haven't gotten to that point yet, be ready to, I don't know, Kristen, honestly, you have to just prepare yourself for the worst to come out in people, because what we're dealing with, and you and I talked about this the first episode that we did together, what you're dealing with is the discomfort that other people are unwilling to confront. The discomfort in their own lives, the discomfort that they have with not accepting the idea, right? Like, let's say you're a person who's stuck. This is all you know. And the idea of changing your life, you're a coach, you're an owner, this is all you've ever known. And the idea of changing your life and getting out of this is extremely uncomfortable. Why would you not project your frustrations with your own lack of adventure, your own lack of willingness to change? Why would you not project that onto someone else who's made the decision, a resolute decision to say, we're going to step? So this is what I mean contextually when I say just be ready for the worst to come out. It may not be a personal attack. You have to be able to look at the other person and say, what is it that they're uncomfortable with, that they're trying to project onto us and our decision in this situation. But it's really tough. Like, how do you prepare for it? You just have to be ready for other people's discomforts to yield some unsavory behavior, and it'll most likely just be directed at you and your decision. But again, it's most likely not, at first, not a personal attack. It'll feel very personal. But what you need to listen for are the cues of the discomforts in their own life that they are trying to verbalize, and they're trying to make that the worst of their lack of their indecisiveness. They're trying to make that appear in you and your decision. But you just have to know what's right for your family, and be mindful of again, the agency that you give to other people to speak on your decisions or into your life. And at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for your family. And if are you willing, What is your comfort level? Are you willing to do the uncomfortable thing and maybe let go of some of the relationships that you developed? It doesn't always have to be negative. It's a part of growing. Change is the only thing that is constant in life, and it's the only thing that pushes us towards growth. So constantly
one of my favorite quotes,
evaluate your comfort.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is, don't let the people in the cheap seats dictate what's happening on the stage of your life. Something like that.
Yeah.
Just don't listen to the people in the cheap seats, because they're not, they'll fall away at some point. So be prepared for the criticism. And I just did an episode on bullying. And one thing I don't think I got the chance to say is, when you're feeling bullied or criticized or like everybody's against you, a lot of times the parents will say, oh, well, they're just jealous. They're just jealous of you. They're just jealous. And you bring up a good point, because they're not just jealous all of the time.
Right.
And I would venture to say that more of the time, it is something in them that they have a problem with themselves, that they are projecting on to you. Usually the things that I get the most upset about are things that are a deficit in me that I'm calling out in other people. And so sometimes that does present itself as jealousy, but more often than not, it's about them and not about you. It doesn't make it hurt any less, but
I think it's just easier for us to call it out as hatred or jealousy. Like, oh, the haters, and they're just jealous. That's the easy thing to say, because it keeps it surface level, right? We talked last time about mental blocks, and using the term mental block keeps things surface level. It doesn't require us to go any deeper. Look, discomfort goes both ways. We could criticize someone else for not being comfortable enough to be vulnerable, but are you comfortable enough to receive that vulnerability, right? And so that discomfort goes both ways, and that lack of growth can come from both camps. So, but what I do completely agree with is, most times it's the discomfort that other people are experiencing of an idea of leaving a job, or they're confronting like the truth about their relationship, or their how they treat their kids, or the life that they're living, and all these things that make humans so complex. We're going to project that onto others, unfortunately, when we don't have the courage to confront that discomfort in ourselves. I remember listening to another podcast years ago. Chris Hogan, who was a financial expert, was talking about writing his first New York Times book, right? So he had been contracted to write a book for the New York Times bestseller. He was excited, and this is not a young guy. Like, he's well into his career. He has a name for himself, and he decides to tell one of his best friends about it. And his best friend was like, man, why do you want to write a book? You think people are actually going to like read it? And he said, I just remember in that moment feeling a profound lack of support, and it hit me, and it sat with him for a moment. And then he said, but I went away and I thought about it. He said, God bless my good friend, but he would never do something like that, and never has. And I realized that it was his unwillingness to, I'm going to interject my own philosophy here, but it was his unwillingness to confront the discomfort of that idea of him writing a book that forced him, or that encouraged him to project that onto Chris and say, well, you can never do it because I would never do it. And that's a lot of times how it is. So going back to this whole inevitable situation where you decide to leave, let's not make the mistake of blanketing this as an industry-wide problem. There are pockets within the industry. There are gym cultures within cheer culture, right? Every gym has its own culture. There are plenty of programs that are supportive. I've talked to many parents who said, yeah, we had to leave that program. We went to a new one. Oh, how was that? Oh, they were so supportive. They agreed that she had outgrown their ability, or they agreed that she needed to take a break, or that maybe changing environment would help her. There's plenty of supportive. But in those situations where, I guess, Kristen, going back to your question, like, how can people prepare? Do an analysis of your gym culture. If you already know that your gym culture is toxic, if you already know that there's passive aggressive behavior in your gym culture, don't be surprised when you try to leave and you're confronted with that same kind of behavior, it was inevitable. That's the culture. And that's where I think a lot of this humor is coming out of gyms with that culture, you know? But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's so nuanced. There's so many things to speak
like
on.
Complication of life. I mean, this is where life, the rubber meets the road, as it were. And I want to flip the narrative a little bit, and maybe the answer is still the same. But let's go back to, hey, we're not here advocating for you to just mispractice whenever and take off on vacation whenever. There is a right way to do that should you need to do that. There is a commitment that comes from cheerleading, and I am a big advocate for everybody needs to be there if you want to be successful. And it goes back to, like you said, the culture of your gym, and I always say the value of your family. If your family value is to win a world championship, then there is nothing else.
Right.
And you're in the gym, and that's the commitment that you made, and that's the value that you're holding, at least for now. And that's okay. And that's why it's important to find where you fit well, because there are gym cultures that their value is to win and to have successful teams, and they're going to push for that, and they will come down on you for missing practice or not doing your homework or whatever their standards are. And I've been, I've been part of teams where it's like, well, where's so-and-so? She's missed practice again. Like, we can't, her stunt group follows every competition because she's never there to practice, and she doesn't make the effort to come in early to work with her stunt group to make up for that lost time. And so here I am. We didn't go to the family reunion, or I missed out on the girls' trip, or whatever, insert whatever. I'm willingly making personal sacrifices. And then I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, where have you been? Like, you're costing me. You're costing my kid. What do you say to those? Because life is not fair. But then you kind of feel the injustice of, we're all here sacrificing. Like, we all have vacations we want to go on. We all have family that we need to be with. We all have that. We made this sacrifice. Why couldn't you?
I think in this scenario, it's important to point out and remind ourselves that stress doesn't trickle up, right? It trickles down. And so in this scenario, it shouldn't be the responsibility of the parents or the athletes to change that gym culture. It's the gym owners, right? It's the head coaches and the people at the top that have to recognize that these grievances are a part of the people that are keeping their business alive, and they have to be able to address it. You know, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek, and just recently he posted something that I'm going to be honest, I'm going to echo it because I identified with the message so much. I'm going to do my own version of his post. But he recently posted, he is a inspirational leader for the business sector, for corporate, all over the world. He's doing keynotes and Q&As with large audiences, all from the corporate world. And he said recently, I know I'm like the business guy. He said, but I'm going to be honest with you, I don't care about business. I could care less about quarter numbers and goals and promotions and all that stuff. He said, but what I do care about is people, and I care about the idea of treating people in business well so that they go home better people. They go home happy people, and they have happier households. And he said, it sounds silly, but I believe this is how we achieve world peace. We start with the cultures where people are committing 40 to 60 hours a week of their lives and make sure that they can go home happier and healthier and have healthier relationships. I feel the same way about cheer. Like, I've grown up in this industry for a large part of my life, but I'm at a point I don't care about any of that. But I want to make sure that the people that I'm helping are the athletes that I'm working with and the parents. Like, I'm so fortunate that what I do, I've been able to yoke in parents in the process. And I want to make sure that they are happier And that is the approach that gyms should be having as well. Make sure your people are happy. You can't please all the people all the time. That by any means, that's not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to please people. You're trying to be an effective communicator, hear their grievances, and address them accordingly. And a big part of addressing that is in your gym culture. Like you said, if your culture is just to win trophies, one other thing Simon said, and this was, Simon says, and this was a great, I know you'd enjoy that. This was a great point. He said, I should probably try to pull up the notes, but he said, if you have people in your corporate culture who are going against the grain, who seem like a bad fit, that's not their fault. That's your fault for not screening them better. Because at the end of the day, you hired them. You thought that they would be a good fit. It's your responsibility to either reassign them or remove them. And I feel the same way with teams, right? Because
or communicating your culture in the first place.
That's exactly it. Communicate the culture in the first place. If there is a misunderstanding of what you're all here to do, if there's a disconnect, and again, that's where effective communication comes in. Are you communicating effectively? If they're not here to do what you envision your gym culture or your program to be setting out to do, that's your fault for not communicating that properly. And then your fault for bringing other people into the fold that don't align with what you're trying to do. If it's that important to you, if you want a program that is community-based, family-based, then that's going to be a different approach, right? That's going to be a different screening process. But if you are trying to win trophies and accolades and go to Worlds and Summit every year and have a level 6 team, and you want to be like a trophy farm gym, then you've got to communicate, hey, guys, this, I don't know what they're doing down the street, but here we win trophies. And if you're not willing to sacrifice everything, then this may not be the right place for you. Just put it out there. Say it. But yeah, I think that it really needs to be communicated, and it has to trickle from the top down, because it's not the responsibility of, parent A and parent B feeling some type of way between them because parent A understood the assignment and parent B is like, well, we're just going to, zip off to Cabo and wherever, and completely disregard the teaching that should be behind our sacrifice, which is, if you make a commitment to, let's be real, probably one of the truest team sports that exists, because none of us can do anything on that floor. Like, gone are the days of individual cheer, right? None of us can do anything on that floor without other people. And so if you're not there to uphold that, it's not the parents' jobs. Like, that's what creates toxicity in your culture. You need to recognize that that's happening and address it from the top down.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't want to overlook, as we close here, I don't want to overlook the sacrifices that gym owners, directors, and coaches are also making, because the things that we're talking about are not easy to balance or juggle. And I do know gym owners that are doing this really well and that do communicate the culture. And it is not to win all of the championships. Like, they want to win and they're competitive, but their culture is set in a way that it does cost them having a world's team. It does cost them maybe having older athletes or high level, at the level 6, 5, 6, 7 level, but they have a truly wonderful environment at their gym where people want to stay and where people leave better people because of it. But that comes at a cost,
with its own cost, right?
Yes, because I don't know a coach or a gym owner out there who wouldn't love to have a world's team or 2 or 3 or 4, or love to be competitive at the Summit or All-Star Worlds, or whatever. Everybody in cheer wants that. I don't know any coach that's like, well, as long as we're all happy and we're good people and our mental health is good, then that's all that matters. Like, we all want to do well. Real. And so, yeah, let's be real and have compassion on our gym leaders that they're just trying to make the right decisions, and they're choosing their sacrifice, but it's still a sacrifice.
I think on the heels of that, I still stand by what I say, that cheer as an industry is slow to evolve, and it suffers from a huge lack of professionalism. But I think that that's not necessarily anybody's fault. I think that if you look at it, and you brought up a great point, that like a major part of this industry is legacy, right? People that kind of, they get in when they're young, they fall in love with it, and they don't necessarily go seeking anything else because they're happy. Like, why would I? I loved coaching so much, I'm going to open my own gym. And they may or may not understand like everything that is involved there, and they learn the hard way. But they're like, most of the cheer industry is just learning from other people who have done it also, and done it in a way that you like, right? There's another thing that Simon had where he was saying how a lot of problems with people who start out at the lowest level of a company and then they rise through the ranks. They're always used to, and it's just funny how easily this is to associate or compare to athletics, but they rise through the ranks, but they're always used to, unless they find a way to become the CEO, they're always used to taking orders, and they're always used to sacrificing. They're always used to fulfilling a need of someone else. And then what happens is they get into a management position, or they get in a position of some influence, and they have a hard time shaking that. And the reason that this stood out to me, it made me think of the cheerleader who became a junior coach, and then a full-time coach, or assistant coach, and then full-time coach, and then co-owner. Maybe they're like, I need to invest in what I do, and then they became the owner. How many owners do we know, Kristen, who have such a hard time delegating? And it's not their fault. They want their, you ask the parents, they're like, oh my gosh, Maggie, she does it all. She's amazing. And you're exactly right that sacrifice happens on both sides of the spectrum. And I think that it's really important if we all just, take a moment to do some self-evaluation and analysis, and take inventory of our sacrifices and what it is that we're doing and how they're affecting us first, and then how they affect us is affecting others in our lives. The families in our gyms, the kids under our tutelage, our own children and spouses at home and partners. Like, how is it affecting other people in our lives?
I love it. And I love the quote from Brene Brown. It's live your life knowing and believing that everyone is doing the best that they can with what they have. And it doesn't mean that they're perfect, and it doesn't mean you have to like it, but hopefully it gives us a little bit more patience and compassion. And Coach Lain, you don't miss. You never miss. And
stop.
I am a big fan.
Thank you.
Hopefully
Likewise.
we'll get the chance to keep doing this, but you guys go find Coach Lain. I really hope that you have, and you may already have this, but have the opportunity to get this message to not just athletes and parents, but to coaches and gym owners as well, because I think that you've got some really great stuff that can change the impact, the culture of the industry in a big way. So
I appreciate that. And
more from you.
We understand, like you said earlier, it's not an easy conversation. It's not an easy task, but I think at this point of the evolution of the sport and the sport culture, it's necessary. Like, it's time for changing, because there are things that work and there are a lot more things that don't work. And I think that we need to start focusing on those things. So I appreciate this platform and the topic of discussion. And if anybody wants to at me or send me a DM and discuss this further, please do. I'm not afraid to have those conversations, those uncomfortable conversations. And I'm here at the end of the day to help in any way that I can.
Well, we have each other's email addresses and phone numbers, and we seem to communicate the most on Instagram. So he's not kidding when he says DM him, because he'll answer.
Yes,
Answer right away. And apparently that's how I communicate too, because I can't answer an email to save my life.
What up, party people? This is Jason Larkins, host of the Let's Talk Cheer podcast, and I've teamed up with Kristen Wheeler of the Cheer Mom podcast and Dan Cotton of the Cheer Biz podcast.
That's right. Hey, everybody, Kristen here. We know that you love cheer, so why not dive into more perspectives? Tune into my podcast, the Cheer Mom podcast, for cheer issues spoken from the parent's perspective. Then head over to Dan's podcast, the Cheer Biz podcast, to learn from a gym owner on how to run a successful cheer business. And of course, don't miss the Let's Talk Cheer podcast featuring Jason Larkins, the one that we all know and love, where they talk about cheer from a coach's perspective.
Which means whether you're a coach, a cheer parent, or a gym owner, we've got you covered. Find all 3 podcasts on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and stay tuned for new episodes each week.